igualdad, pero esta vez me separaron. Dijeron mucho, pero no se olvidaron de callarse. Cuánto odio por mi piel sembraron. Dijeron historia y la tergiversaron. Dijeron guerra, muerte, odio y nos culparon. Siempre. Enfermedades, epidemias nos contagiaron. Exterminación de mi fauna complace a tus mercados. Dijeron riqueza y todos se lo robaron. Oro, platino, diamante, a la fuerza se lo llevaron. Y la actualidad es tan triste que todo aquello que dijeron es lo mismo que hoy se dice más. ¿Quién dice, quién explota, quién se beneficia? El asesino, el mismo que da las noticias. Hay una cuenta fácil que siempre me da las grandes riquezas, de dónde vienen y hacia dónde van.
Independiente como los Mao Mao, concluyente como los Mao Mao,
como los Mao Mao,
como los Mao Mao. Somos resistentes como los Mao Mao, independiente como los Mao Mao, concluyente como los Mao Mao,
como los Mao Mao,
como los Mao Mao. Somos resistentes como los Mao Mao. Nati Dre es afroresistencia, cultura ancestral, afrodescendencia, solidaridad. Esa es la esencia, la diáspora africana eleva la conciencia, conciencia negra, universal, progresista y transcultural. Negros y mestizos revolucionando, pueblos caribeños y africanos en un solo bando. No más explotación, colonialismo interno, no más confusión, supremacía blanca en el Babilón. Soy rojo, negro y verde, afroliberación. Mientras más negro, más represión. Somos creadores, recupera tu visión. Mi misión es educar con amor, contra el silencio, vivo sin temor. Independiente como los Mao Mao, concluyente como los Mao Mao,
como los Mao Mao,
como los Mao Mao. Somos resistentes como los Mao Mao, independiente como los Mao Mao, concluyente como los Mao Mao,
como los Mao Mao,
como los Mao Mao. Somos resistentes como los Mao Mao.
Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to the Rise Up Morning Show. How's everybody doing?
Good. How are you?
You sound like you just woke up. Like you just rolled over.
I did. I've been up for
the Rise Up Morning Show. Yeah.
How's everybody doing? How's everybody doing?
I'm doing good. I'm doing good today.
That's good. Yeah. That's good. How about you, Ikemba? What's going on? What's going on?
Doing good, man. It was a rocky weekend, I will admit. You know, we were supposed to record We Charge Colonialism on Saturday. I was all ready and prepared for it, and then there was a hiccup right before we was about to go live, so we weren't able to do it. But everything is a little better now,
Yeah, I was ready too, Akimba. And I forgot to mention last time when I introduced myself that I'm part of We Charge Colonialism as well. And I was ready, Akimba.
Yeah,
please, everybody in the chat right now, please go and subscribe to We Charge Colonialism. Really good work. I actually in the midst of the crazy weekend I had, was able to catch some of Ikemba's shorts on YouTube when I was searching for history and knowledge. And I feel like everybody does that. Everybody goes on YouTube and tries to find a speech. And so I came across Ikemba on We Charge Colonialism. So I just want to highlight you guys as comrades. Make sure that everybody's out there subscribing, and the love and reciprocity and cheesy share, subscribeness is spread around. So yeah. How was your weekend though, Natasha? How what was it as rocky as Ikemba's?
No, it wasn't. No, it wasn't really as rocky as Ikemba's. It went pretty smooth. I've been trying to at least find at least a day or two within my weekends and life to just get my other stuff together. So I kind of did that this weekend, which was really good. And I got to see family and stuff, so that was really good for me.
That's good. That's good. It's always good to see family.
What about yours? Again, how your weekend go?
My weekend, it was eventful, exciteful. Not too much. I wouldn't say negative. It's just working with being a part of an organization. You have to deal with that negative side, like people not wanting your, the organization to strive, so they come up with false narratives and stuff like that. So just like having to debunk all of that. But no,
Wow.
I was if I'm being completely honest, I was gearing up really for this a conversation that we're gonna have, and I'm not gonna name the name yet, but it's a big name, and so I was just gearing up. You guys already know about it. It's in the chat. So I was just gearing up for that conversation, because when you talk to this individual, you have to be ready, you have to be prepared, because the individual could answer all of your questions in 5 minutes, and now you're stuck with an hour, a 50-minute conversation of trying to come up with on the cusp conversation. So again, just preparing for that. But it was a good weekend. It was a really good weekend. I'm glad that at least, you Kemba, things have kind of smoldered down. I don't know what was going on. I don't, that's not none of my business, but I'm glad to see, my brother's at least able to attend today, be here on Tuesday. And so, and Natasha, your weekend, we want good weekends. We want good weekends. We want to be coming on here angry and aggravated, so.
And if you don't, I feel like sometimes if you don't have a good weekend, it affects your week.
Definitely does.
Yeah.
Like,
because I was ready to be like, man, I don't know if I'm coming on.
I had to drop that message in there last night, and apologies on that as well, because I have to stop doing that. I have to stop trying to text y'all, and y'all are in bed already, got your pajamas on and whatnot.
Well, no, you're good. My job be on do not disturb 24/7. No disrespect to anybody.
Become one of those who you gotta push your message through.
But I'm always,
what's that on the iPhone where it's like send anyway, and it rattles the message.
Like you thought you were on do not disturb, but we gotta push through anyway.
Yeah, for sure.
So if go ahead.
Question. When are we gonna break down? Because that's Fernando on the intro, right?
Yeah, that's
Every time I listen to it, man, I'm ready to have a conversation around that music. So we had that song, so we have to do that at some point, because he's killing it, and what I mean, in a positive way. He's saying a lot, man, addressing a lot of contradictions that I think it's political education in that piece, all in itself. Yeah. So at some point, man, we got to, especially like when Fernando's on,
Yeah, shoot. I think all of us are going to be on tomorrow, if I'm not mistaken. So maybe Fernando can give us a breakdown on that, just to keep it a buck with everybody. Fernando is here. He's just on the back burner.
You shouted him out.
So we'll get it out. We'll get it out sooner rather than later. But if you guys can, before we go to break, and hear some words from Fred Hampton, can you guys kind of briefly break down what we're going to be getting into today? I could say the guest that we have on is somebody who's been on my platform before, and is somebody who, to me, embodies what true solidarity looks like via BIPOC, as people call it, or just solidarity amongst indigenous peoples. For me, a better term, more accurate. If you guys can just break down, what we're going to be going over before we hear some revolutionary words from Fred Hampton.
Yeah, for sure. There's a story that I'm going to be talking about, and that we're going to be talking about in general. That's about Miss South Africa, and some controversy around Miss South Africa, and whether or not, one of the contestants that's within the Miss South Africa pageant should be allowed to run because, of her last name being a Nigerian last name. So we'll talk more about that later.
Okay, and Ikemba?
Yeah, that's going to be it. I'm looking forward to that conversation. That's wild. And that xenophobia among other Africans.
Right.
So, that's crazy. That's why Pan-Africanism is so important. But so I'll be talking about, speaking of, not Nigerians, going to Nigeria, the recent protests that has been taking place over there, you know, dealing with the contradictions of poverty, inflation, just the economic crisis in Nigeria. That kind of like encompasses
colonialism still
colonialism. Yeah, that's what it boils down to, right? So yeah, we'll get into that and just give an update for the folks, let them know, for our comrades, people out there, let y'all know what's going on.
Yeah, no, thank you guys both for breaking that down. We're gonna take this Black Power or break for Black Power on Black Power Media, the Rise Up Morning Show. Stay tuned.
I'm the deputy chairman of the state of Illinois Black Panther Party here in Hampton. And a lot of people don't understand the Black Panther Party's relationship with white mother country radicals. A lot of people don't even understand that word that Eric uses a lot. But what we're saying is that there are white people in the mother country that are for the same types of things that we are for stimulating revolution in the mother country. And we've said that we'll work with anybody and form coalition with anybody that has revolution on their mind. We're not a racist organization because we understand that racism is an excuse used for capitalism. And we know that racism is a byproduct of capitalism. Everything would be all right if everything was put back in the hands of the people. And we're going to have to put it back in the hands of the people. Everybody in the state of Illinois is going to have to be involved or even around the revolution, because we're going to have one. We're going to have to do more than talk. We're going to have to do more than listen. We're going to even have to do more than learn. We're going to have to start practicing, and that's very hard. We're going to have to start learning, and you learn through practice. We got to start making mistakes, and you learn through making mistakes. We got to start getting out there with the people. And a lot of times we think we're better than the people, but that's an insult, and that's criminal. Think you're better than the people. But we got to get together and learn where it's at. It's going to take a lot of hard work. That breakfast for children is something else. You ought to dig on it. Every sister in this audience. Every sister in this audience ought to get themselves together and come on down and help us with that Breakfast for Children program. You ought to come down and help feed them children in the morning. We have Breakfast for Children because we teach the people through practice, through observation and participation, that people can be fed free. That's the people's thing. Socialism is the people. You're afraid of yourself. If you're afraid of socialism, you're afraid of yourself. We know they have our pictures. We know they're looking for us. We know they want us. But we're still saying that even though we could be in a sense, as far as this system goes, on the mountaintop, we in the Black Panther Party, because of our dedication and understanding what's in the valley, knowing that the people in the valley, knowing that we originally came from the valley, knowing that our flag is the same flag as the people in the valley, knowing that our enemy is on the mountaintop, our friends are in the valley, we say even though it's nice to be on the mountaintop, we're going back to the valley. I be in the office every day. I be in the streets propagandizing every day. I be working with everybody every day. I be teaching that solidarity is the thing. The end of a complete wipeout of imperialism is the thing. So if you're going to be thinking about me, that's what Bobby would be teaching. If you're going to be thinking about us, all we say is ain't no thing about going nowhere, getting killed. All we want to know is that you're doing what we'd be doing if we were here. And you got to do that. You can't do it unless you believe that you can do it. In the spirit of liberation, we understand that they want everybody in the party in jail. And we know that if we try to figure out and separate and divide who should go and who shouldn't go, we spend more time doing that than working for the people. So the quick solution, the speedy one, nobody goes. Nobody goes. We all stay right here. people? Because we love the people. Okay, you put your hands down now. We say all power to all people. We say white power to white people. Brown power to brown people. Yellow power to yellow people. Black power to black people. X power to those that we left out. We say Panther power to the Vanguard Party. When you leave here saying the last word, before you go to bed tonight, say I am a revolutionary. Make that the last word. In case you don't wake up, then somebody might believe it and you might, end up in what they call a revolutionary happy hunting ground. Say that. I am a revolutionary. Say it when you're going out. Everybody leave. Okay, we're going to say it while we're going out. Hey, we're going to start a thing called Free Fred. Don't that sound nice? Hey, let's do that. Free Fred.
Yeah, my bad on that intro. It said Valentin Lopez. That's the next slide that it was. So, and talking about weekends, that to give you guys a primary example of what that's that's what I was doing. Yeah. I was messing up our videos.
I think everybody got the message though.
You was on your job this weekend. For
sure.
If we can, let's break this down. So he was talking in the constructs of revolution and the importance of staying steadfast in revolution and with the people. The question that I pose to you guys, is, in the wake of living in a world where they are on a uber level, emulating more aesthetics of fascism and the dominance that fascism has over our communities. The question that I ask you guys, is the importance, of steadfastness, in the wake, of striving for revolution against fascism, and how Fred's words even today are and as they were, then are important now, and maybe how we can, emulate a lot of, what are some things that we can emulate that was done then that, we definitely know can work now, or stuff that's actually being done, in the midst of, you guys are part of an organization. And so, what are some things that you guys see that are key highlights that we should focus on that help against this, that help the united front against fascism, as, also an elder is calling for, by the way. I have to shout out Daruba bin Wahad, that made that call some months ago. So Natasha, I'll pass this over to you.
Yeah, that was a long question. But I think I think definitely in terms of thinking about, steadfastness in the face of fascism, which includes racism.
You went wrong there.
And I think the importance, and one of the key things that I think about is knowing who you are and practicing your culture. I think that that is a key part of being steadfast. I think obviously we're in a protracted struggle, and that we are carrying on the work of those who came before us, and doing as much work as we could do in our time right now, so that we can pass the baton on to those generations who will come after us, so that they can see true liberation in their time. And so I think that when it comes to steadfastness, one of the things that helps us to be steadfast is really being able to practice our culture. And that takes knowing who you are as an African person. Mm-hmm. When you don't know that, and you have some confusion around who you are, it's going to take you off course. You're not going to be able to really remain steadfast in the way that you need to, when your confusion can lead you down this road, then you're here at this road, and you may go where the wind blows, or you may be easily you may come to do work in a particular area, and if they're able to provide you some more misinformation and lead, and maybe throw some money at you because you're not firm in your your culture and who you are, you may go that way as well. So I think that that's one of the things that really speaks to the importance of and how you maintain steadfastness in the face of, fascism, which is, nothing new for, as oppressed people, as African people. That's not we've been, dealing with this war against us that we're engaged in for many years. And so that fascism is, I think that there's been recently like, a rise in the, talk about fascism. But I mean, I feel like when really did it go away? You probably couldn't just point to one person and be like, oh, well, this is the fascist leader, like, people think about when they're talking about fascism. But if it's the government, a group of white people doing it, okay. You can't point to one, but that what fascism has existed, and that's ultimately what we've been fighting against. One of the key things that we've been fighting against all this time. So I think in terms of like Fred Hampton, how he talks about the importance, the message that he's sending in terms of the importance of maintaining steadfastness is really thinking about and knowing and practicing. When he talks about like putting into practice, what are you putting into practice? Right? When you think about being steadfast, like the practice of what? Like, what is it that you're practicing that, that helps you to make sure that you can be steadfast? And I think you have to be practicing your culture. But first you got to know what that is. And first you got to know that you're African first,
Thank you.
Yeah. I love that. I actually, I had, I was going to touch on something else in regards to just being steadfast, and I may circle back around to it, but as Natasha was talking about culture, I think like that is really important, and it made me like really focus on the importance. I want to double down on what Natasha was saying, the importance of staying steadfast with our culture, especially this revolutionary culture that we're a part of and that we're developing and educating others on, right? When we have this political education, it's important to continuously point out the contradictions of colonial capitalism, because a lot of our people have, once were revolutionaries, once were a part of this struggle, went into academia and now really just theorized about it, right? The practice is going, because the practice component of our culture is very important. It's revolution. It's essential, it's vital, a part of this revolutionary culture. Understanding who we are, our identity, right? Marcus Garvey came along and told us, even before Marcus Garvey, but just throwing out those big names, right? Marcus Garvey, Malcolm X, was telling us that we were African. So not moving away from that, right? It's like if you're down with Malcolm X and you unite with Malcolm X and you use Malcolm X, right, in your organizing and as far as what he said we should be doing, and you try to pattern yourself after Malcolm and others, well, yeah, Malcolm made it clear who we were too, right? So I think that's important, because a lot of what we see is people really participating in the system of colonial capitalism and not doing the work to overthrow it and destroy it. So it's important that we continue to just be determined to fight the colonial capitalist system, point out the contradictions, have that conversation, because you have folks who, that will say, oh, well, that was the 60s, that was the 50s, 60s, that was the 70s. And it's like, well, those same contradictions still exist. You know what I'm saying? So, the language is still relevant to this day. And the organizing that they were doing is still relevant to this day. It's not, nothing has changed in regards to colonial capitalism, the oppression and exploitation of African people and other indigenous people, not just in the United States, but around the world. We're still dealing with this empire. So I think that's important. I think there's some also, Fred Hampton, I was getting chills as I was listening to, Conrad, Chairman Fred speak. He said also this willingness to organize. He might not use that term, but I'm thinking of Malcolm X, but he was talking about organizing with other oppressed people as well against the system of colonial capitalism. And Malcolm X said the same thing, right? That's the approach that Malcolm was taking when he was at Oxford, and he was debating at Oxford and whipping on that European over there. Intellectually, he said at the end how the ruling class has misused their power, and he's willing to organize with anybody that is willing to destroy the system, to overthrow this system. And that has to be our mindset. And that what he said then is still relevant to this day. And we see comrades from all backgrounds who are willing to align themselves with Africans as we fight to destroy the system. But yeah, I mean, there was a lot of other things that he said, man. But yeah, important. I think I hopefully I addressed those questions.
You did. You expanded it. You expanded even on your answer, which was something that I was expecting to get from this conversation, because we could put those videos out there and go right into whatever go right into Miss South Africa, or go right into Nigeria. And if we when we do that we misalign ourselves with the goal in mind, which is to not just put these videos out there for educational purposes, but to also break down our own personal analysis, and to not just use his words and not really understand how they operate in the constructs of contemporary fascism today. And so you brung something up that was really dope. But there's one thing that that Fred said. We talk about white power. I take the approach of Imam Jamil Al-Amin, where he said we just want white people to be civilized. Like we don't when he said that, I completely forgot that was in there. But that's not to take from the end goal, which is that we're not looking at this from a means of wanting to demonize a whole demographic of people that probably share the same understandings of the complexity that is imperialism. But we also have to understand that they will never be the highlight nor the forefront. They will never be the what they are today, which are they were never holding the seats and tables that they don't need to be sitting at. And so that's just how I see it in the context of what you were saying, Natasha, in regards to culture. When we look at the steadfastness that is, towards revolution, that is a struggle towards, a revolution for all people and a fight against fascism, culture plays in a huge part. And that's why it's constantly being attacked. Africans are constantly being attacked. We just seen, recently, individuals put themselves in a position to deeply be xenophobic to their own people. And I'm talking about people like Gilbert Arenas and Paul Pierce and whatnot, in the context of how they talked about the African brothers from South Sudan, regardless of the monetary funding that US gives South Sudan for them to be an independent state, as they say they are. It's disgusting, but it's all by design, and it's all made for individuals to be indoctrinated into believing that they need to not care about Africans, that they need to dehumanize Africans, which is what we on this platform aim to debunk. We need to be more pro-African. We need to be more pan-African. We need to be more inclusive. You talked about Malcolm X speaking at Oxford, and I just watched the video yesterday. I actually played it on my live show yesterday of Chairman O'Malley, literally the same date and some years after, talking about the need for an African Union that does not have any European aesthetics or entities a part of it, and broke down how a bunch of white whole European continents, countries got together, and decided to map out the portions of Africa, naming portions of Africa like Cameroon, which is a shrimp in Portugal, breaks down all of that. Chairman O'Malley does. And so it's super important for us to be steadfast towards revolution, and against, fascism with the united front. But as Natasha, go back to what Natasha was saying, we have to implement principled cultural approaches, and that not necessarily doesn't take time. It's just we are living in a world where, at the same time where we are trying to better our communities and give the truth, we are constantly at the same time debunking consistent, that are consistently coming false narratives and actions and tactics, aesthetics that align with white hegemony, which in part oppress us. And so I think in context of Fred and his words and how they are very, very much so, and very, I would say, important now more than ever, because we are seeing in in current time the reciprocity that is the duopoly of U.S. imperialism that is working hand in hand to usher in more restraints that are aligned with fascism. And so being steadfast is something that I personally feel is important. But as Natasha outlined, how do you be steadfast? It starts the root culture, understanding the roots of colonialism and how they've affected your culture, and understanding what your culture can contribute to revolution and struggle, liberation, all of those nice positive words that we all strive for. So yeah.
I just wanted to give a shout out to, because we showed the clip, to Fred Hampton Jr., who was out there in Chicago, Black Panther Party Cub, who's doing a lot of, continuing to do the work of his, father out there with the people, doing the work for the people. I think they're doing like amazing work over there at the Hampton House. And also, I'm not going to go into it, because, that you can go all day, but I do think that there's also thinking about what he said in his time and thinking about how it applies to us in our time, that from when he was talking, and Kimba talking, about the quote that Malcolm X said during his speech in Oxford, that also what are the lessons we've learned from, especially as African people, from collaborating with other groups of people in terms of incommensurabilities, in terms of now, the language that's used to kind of like make us all a big blob, like, the BIPOC word, or like people of color and things like that. And seeing what has happened to some of those, what is the word I'm looking for? So to some of those alliances that we've had in the past that have broken down. And now where do people stand, when it comes to how they align with us? Because there's things in terms of like what has come out of our alliances that have hurt Black people that we're not talking about, and why some Black people do not really want to be, working in conjunction in those kind of ways. And in order for us to be able to like have those alliances and make, and have, work alongside these other groups, there's things that we got to work out, that we have to, bring those contradictions up that exist, that are getting in the way of us being able to do some of those things. And why, when we're talking even to like our people, sometimes they're like, okay, well, we need to do this, but this is what's been going on. Like in our communities, when it comes to, we used to have some, Asian solidarity, but they, this is what's going on when you shopping in their stores, or us who, experienced different relationships with them, ones that used to be, stronger, but now things have shifted. So I think like that's definitely, in our time, how do we look at how those relationships we've built with other groups have, what has that contributed, and what do we need to do now over, now that in the space, that time that we're in. So I think like definitely thinking about those things too. There's a good article that I read. It was actually from an indigenous scholar that she talks about incommensurabilities, and she's laying out some of those things that, we can align in these, but then there's some of these that we can't. And then how do we work together knowing those things, as opposed to pretending like those things don't exist? So, I thought about that, saying like all power to the people, and, and all that other stuff, but I digress.
But to build on that real quick though, like I think that's why political education is very important. And as we come together, as Africans come together, we set the terms of these alliances, these arrangements, and what they look like. We have that conversation among ourselves, and making sure that we can unite with a way forward with other groups. And so that's important, because going to your point, there's some people who they're like, no, anybody who organizes with non-Africans is a traitor. And then you have some people who are like, okay, yeah, we organize, we can have these sort of multi-ethnic or multiracial organizations, and everyone, you know, has equal say and equal power within the organizations. And then others where it's like, you know, yeah, you can organize in your community and help us, you know. So like there's different ways that people you know, feel as though that we should that others should participate in the liberation of African people. So we have to be able to sit down and not be caught up in our ideology and say, okay, how can we move forward as a people? Because, you know, these people ain't going nowhere. You know what I'm saying? Like talking about Europeans, and then understanding the contradictions that even others have, whether they're Indian, Chinese, or you know, Native American, indigenous American, Aboriginal, Australian, you know, like all of these other folks who are dealing with colonialism. You know, how do we, you know, come together to overthrow, you know, the European imperialists, the European empire, you know? So yeah, that's what the PE is all about, man. These are some things I feel like we got to really deepen, you know. But, you know, with that being said, though, Africa first.
Exactly. Right. You got to get yourself right first.
We figure all that, but we got to make sure we at least, you know, on that page, though.
Most definitely. Well, Natasha, do you want to kick off this conversation we're getting ready to have about Miss South Africa? I will pull up the slide for you, so that way we can break this down.
I'm gonna do a quick read. I highlighted some stuff for us in advance.
I'm gonna go on mute just in case, you know.
So I'm gonna read it straight off of here. Let me make this bigger for myself so that I can. My
apologies too, because
no, you're good. So basically this story talks about Miss Africa. So you know how we have Miss America here, they have a Miss America in South Africa. That's a whole nother thing. But anyway, so within the pageant, you know, there's different groups of people that there's a bunch of different women who participate. I think there's like 15 finalists. And so one of the finalists, her name is she's actually, when it says law student, Chidima China, I hope I said it right. I'm sorry if I didn't. A coveted spot.
You was over in South Africa. You should be. You know,
some I'm better with than others. So based on her, you know, her last name, she's been getting some backlash. You know, that is stemming from some of the xenophobia that exists within South Africa. And so they were saying how like her last name hints at her connection to Nigeria. And so, you know, people who felt like, oh no, she shouldn't be part of, you know, the South African Miss South Africa because she's from Nigeria, started to make some noise online. And so you can scroll up. You can scroll up a little bit, but it says that, like, you know, they found that her father's, scroll back up the other way. Yeah, they found that her father is Nigerian, though her mother is South African. Her family had come from neighboring Mozambique. And so she was born in South Africa to a South African mother and Nigerian father. But even though they found that out, they're still, you know, making a big fuss about her being one of the contestants for Miss South Africa. So you can scroll down. Yeah, so it says that on behalf of the South Africans, this was just a Twitter user who was saying that we cannot, you know, X, whatever you want to call it, we do not recognize her. And that name, ! She better start packing and go home. And says, but where is home? In she is from South Africa. She is South African, and as verified by the organizers of the pageant, and that she grew up and was born in Soweto, which we know is next to Johannesburg. And then it says that the country's cultural minister, Gayton McKenzie, the leader of the Patriotic Alliance Party, which has joined a coalition government and made migration issues a key part of its platform, chimed in. So this is what this, who's the culture of the minister, country's cultural minister said. We truly cannot have Nigerians compete in our Miss South Africa competition. I want to get all the facts before I comment, but it gives funny vibes already. So you saying that you want to get all the facts, but you're already making a comment that it gives funny vibes, even though the pageant already says she's qualified, and even though she was born in South Africa and has a South African mother. So let's continue. So, before you go, scroll back up. So if you look at the photo here, it shows you the 15 shortlisted contestants for the 2024 Miss South Africa. So if you look at the picture closely, you'll notice that there are some people there that are on there that I would think would be questioned as to, whether or not they can run for Miss South Africa, but are not being questioned. Yet this woman is. So let's continue. And so it says that, Miss Adesina added that the whole situation felt like a black on black hate, highlighting a particular strain of xenophobia in South Africa, known as Afrophobia, which targets other Africans. She felt that she was not the only contestant among the last 16 women with a name that had origins from beyond the country's shores. So there are some with South Asian and European names and European features and looks and everything, if you look at it also, the picture. Yet she was receiving the bulk of criticism. This was not the first time that this has happened for Miss Melissa Nyamuli, a Miss South Africa contestant last year. It has brought up difficult memories. So she was 28 and she was the target of the same vitriol that's currently happening to Miss Adesina because of her father being from Uganda. So you can see her picture right here down at the bottom as well. And it's important for you to keep in mind what these women look like, right? The image before, where you're seeing who's being questioned, who's not, even if they have last names that point to origins outside of South Africa. And so this is, last year's contestant who was saying that it was, it brought up, the same memories of, she went through this same vitriol last year in terms of her being a contestant from Miss South Africa. She said her voice cracked when she admitted she felt shame at her Ugandan identity when she was younger because of the Afrophobia that she experienced. So you can scroll up a little bit more. And it says, I would not want to be seen with my father because of his dark skin and East African features were a dead giveaway. And then this sociologist that was questioned in this article, she's linking the hostility to South Africa's history of racism and the apartheid system, which imposed a strict hierarchy that privileged white people. And she says there is a sad apartheid mentality that we are struggling to shake as a country. It shows the deep self-hate that we as Black South Africans carry with us. She also added that that they've internalized, South Africans have internalized oppressive racist reasoning such as colorism, where light skin tones are perceived as better. So this can help us think and hint to why women who look like straight up white women, and probably are straight up white women who are contestants within this, and even those who are South Asian are not being questioned, even though they have last names also that are from outside of South Africa. And so it continues on to say that, apartheid ended in 1994. The government led by Nelson Mandela's African National Congress welcomed African migrants and asylum seekers to the country, in part to aid its reintegration into the continent after the isolation. So we know that part of the movement of Africans into South Africa comes from the legacy of apartheid and them being isolated from the rest of Africa and trying to, again, come back to one Africa, right? Come back to that unity. It says, but when many South Africans struggling financially, foreigners became the target for some frustration by their institution. And it also should be pointing out, like when we're talking about South Africans struggling financially, even still currently, it's been like this for many decades, but currently still Black South Africans, or African people in South Africa have the highest unemployment rate among all groups. So even South Asians who live there and the Europeans who are still living there, they have lower unemployment rates than actual African people from who are indigenous to the land, to South Africa. And it says Zimbabwe, Nigerians, and Somalians, among others, have been accused of taking opportunities and resources from South Africans. There is a, quote, perception of outsiders as competitors for scarce jobs, resources, living space, and services. Michael Morris, head of the Media South African Institute of Race, told BBC. And he says that the growing number of Africans succeeding in South Africa sometimes can be easily trigger resentment and violence. And it says that this climate of hostility has occasionally erupted in attacks. South Africa experienced its worst outbreak of violence against mostly African foreigners. So again, back to, the apartheid, the white supremacy, the colonial mentality, right? You're having these attacks and you're saying that people are taking your jobs and living space, but who are the ones that you're looking at more than any other group? Is the African people, the other African people who look like you, who are dark skinned, not those who are not from that land and who are not, indigenous African people of the land in general, but those who, are dark skinned, who fit the criteria that Europeans and European colonials have set in terms of this hierarchy of who should be allowed to have jobs and access and space, and who shouldn't be, and how that mentality is being carried out. And it says that there are Black South Africans who will argue that Africans from elsewhere in the continent don't belong in South Africa. So we can continue that they don't belong in Africa, but not the, not the leftover colonizers who control most of the resources.
Oh, you same thought I'm having right now.
And it says I would not want to be seen with. Oh yeah, scroll down to the next one. To the next page, and then we'll zoom out of this, and then you guys can chime in. It says that and so this contestant, the one who last year experienced it, says that she had often tiptoed around xenophobia, but then when the last year when everything happened, it gave her a chance to really bring to the surface the xenophobia that's there, but like I guess people tiptoe around and don't talk about. And then she used it as a way to really talk about unity and to say that, Africans should unify. And even Julius Malema said that, why do people want to say that, the current contestant who's facing vitriol is Nigerian or a Mozambican when she was born there? Again, the absurdity of it. And it says that, again, like I was saying last year, she talked about, the contestant from last year was saying how, she talked about during the pageant how, quote, let's step into our power as Africans. We are one. She said that, and the audience cheered, and you can scroll up to the last portion that's highlighted. But it seems that it did not take root as the discrimination has currently resurfaced again this year. So again, using the platform she had last year to really call for African unity. But because of the entrenchment of it, I think, obviously it's one thing to call for unity. It's another thing to, like we were saying, practice it, do it. What does that mean to have African unity, especially going back to what you were talking about, the Berlin Conference and how Europeans carved up all their pieces. We talk about getting rid of these borders. How do we get rid of the borders without, getting our minds back to unity, like what it means to have unity? If I'm looking at you, another African person as the enemy and not really the real enemy, how are we going to be able to break down these false borders that were created? And so I think, it really points to that too. And we can see that in a lot of places. And I think I forgot which country it was. Maybe you remember, Kimba, that I think we had done a story maybe a year ago. I think it was it Nigeria who like outlawed, white people being, on their billboards or like being part of the, like as the standard or fashion or whatever. I can't remember the country. But if I find it, I'll pull it up and say it again. But I think, thinking about those things, how do you bring back to being Black and African, going back to your culture? Like, what does that mean to practice your culture, and what is African culture? Because as much as you can feel you're like these feelings that you're having of xenophobia, they're not going toward the people who are really not from Africa. They're not going toward them. They're going toward your fellow African people who have been harming, are continually to be harmed by the legacy of colonialism, by neo-colonialism that still exists today. And you're in that same boat, and you're looking at them as the enemy. And so how does that get in the way of unity, which we know it gets in the way of being able to, have unity in practices. So I think like a lot of the things we've already touched on, like show up in this news story, and in terms of what needs to be done to combat this kind of thing, especially thinking about education, right? Education, media, like what are the images that are put forth in terms of like who you're putting forth as the standard, who's African, and all of this other stuff. What are the images? And also like the history that you're learning. Whose history are you learning? Whose story are you learning? Like from whose worldview and whose perspectives are you doing it from? Because this is entrenched in it. So it's not just you can't just the call to action is not enough, right? It's got to be really done in the media, within education, within cultural spaces, all of that.
Yeah, no, thank you for outlining that and breaking that down. As you said, that was something over the weekend that you were able to indulge in for us to cover today. The amount of just you breaking that down was, I'm trying not to do, because people say I raise my eyebrows and shit like that. So I was trying so desperately, like, whoa, I was just like, let me hone in, let me keep this. It's disgusting. But it also is by design. As Dr. Ani talked about, it's one of the videos that we played here on the Rise Up Morning Show, is that this is by design. So all these every individual that's out there that is exhibiting anti-blackness and they're black or they're African, they're doing the bidding of white hegemony, so that they don't have to do it for it. Now that and you bring up neoliberalism, neo-colonialism, it's embedded and it will be continually embedded unless we primarily address the contradiction that is colonialism and how we dismantle it. And so I know, particularly, not that we're pressed for time, but I don't want to go in like tangent form, so I'm gonna pass this over to Ikemba, so we can get your analysis, and then you can actually break down something that's going on in Nigeria before we get to our guest that is actually in here as well with us. So
this where to begin, but to your point, man, like we have to understand this is by design. And when we talk about the design, like it's colonial capitalism at the end of the day. And when we think about capitalism, there's this competition that is an aspect of capitalism that keeps the system going. It keeps us fighting against each other, so that we can get a piece of this pie or these resources that are ours but are under the control of someone else. And so that's what keeps capitalism going. That's what keeps it thriving. When the ruling class is able to have us competing and fighting each other to get a hold of these resources, right? And as we're fighting to get these resources, it really empowers them. They're able to accumulate wealth through the competition, through us competing with each other. They're really sitting back. They don't really have to compete too much. Sometimes there might be another corporation that comes along that wanted, so you have really a small minority among themselves that may be competing with each other, right? But never enough to like really knock someone out the box, right? Or to take them down. Sometimes they take themselves down, but they'll merge with each other before they fall off. But going back to us, like we're being a part of the system, participating in the system, and wanting to get a piece of our own resources, this pie, we end up destroying ourselves. And so just tying this into the story, this is where this xenophobia, and because Natasha touched on it in the beginning, it's sort of just like giving that history of its origins. The other thing, because we're pressed with time, the other thing I just want to point out is and Natasha touched on this, the South African identity. It's a colonial identity. And, you know, when you go to where the name comes from, the name South Africa is derived from the country's geographical location at the southern tip of Africa. Upon formation, the country was named the Union of South Africa in English and Unie van Zuid-Afrika in Dutch, reflecting its origin from the unification of 4 British colonies, right? And so, you know, you walking, you sound foolish to even, you know, talk about the origin of someone's name and they're not South African. you're colonized. You know what I'm saying? We call it occupied Zania or Zania. You know, that's what the Pan-Africans call it, you know, in the African, the Hulu movement as African internationalists, you know, that's what we, you know, call it occupied Zania. But, you know, it's just a serious contradiction. We have to understand that, you know, we are one African people. It's one thing we can learn. Last thing I'll say is just the lesson we can learn from the Africans in the diaspora that came to the Americas, that were Mende, Yoruba, Igbo, you know, all of these different ethnic groups that came over here as enslaved people, as colonized people. They understood that they had a common enemy, and they came together and they understood that they were African people. They no longer seen themselves as Mende, Igbo, Ashanti, and so forth. They said we are African people, and that African identity, you know, has been with us to this day, and we've used that to resist against our common enemy. And so this is what our brothers and sisters on the continent have to do. They have to see themselves as one people to resist colonialism. But that's it. We can talk about one thing too. Like yesterday, I seen there's this Black Star Festival, film festival in Philadelphia. That I'm so ignorant, man. I need some culture because it's been going on for years and I didn't even know about it. I've been in New York too long, but. One of the films, sister, she went to Ghana, and she did this documentary on skin bleaching of the skin. And I'm digressing a bit, but this story, I don't know, it's just like connecting me, just this lost identity and you know, just being proud of who we are as African people was all through that film. But we'll save that discussion for another time, man. But it's just think about that.
Yeah.
No, yeah, most definitely. We're all going to be on tomorrow, so maybe that'd be something that we can bring up to go right into so Ikemba, you're not done talking yet because we got your piece coming up right now.
Hey, I'll be brief because this is we'll because of our guest, but I'll touch on it a bit. You want to share?
Yeah, I'm going to share the screen so that at least I just wanted to be respectful to the work that you do for Rise Up and for Black Power Media, and reading these articles, taking the time. So we definitely can still talk about it.
Okay, no doubt. So we probably, a lot of people are probably aware of the protest that's happening in Nigeria. Is it Tinubu? Am I pronouncing that right? Tinubu. I'm gonna call him Tinubu.
Yeah, Tinubu.
Okay. Nigeria's Tinubu urges end to protests against economic hardship. Protesters demand quicker reforms and government action to ease the pain amid reforms carried out by the new president. So President Bola Tinubu has told Nigerians protesting against the cost of living crisis that he has heard them as he called for the suspension of the demonstrations and the end to bloodshed in his first public comment since protests broke out last week. In this televised address on Sunday, Tinubu called for an end to violence in several states since the protests started, saying he was always open to dialogue. And these protests aren't happening all around Nigeria. I think in the Niger Delta, there's no protests happening there as of yet because they this is what they are saying. They don't see a stake in the protests that are taking place. These are the contradictions we having right here. But that's for another day, right? But Lagos is one of the places that the protest is taking place, and a lot of people are looking around Nigeria, looking to see what's going to happen in Nigeria, or how things are going to turn out there. So rights groups Amnesty International has accused security forces of killing at least 13 protesters, while police say 7 people died and denied responsibility. And I think I'm gonna just stop there. I just kind of just wanted to make people aware of what's going on. The protest is revolving around economic hardships. Cost of living has increased since Tinubu has become president. The subsidies that were the subsidies on electricity, I think petroleum, and there's another subsidy that they get, but there were subsidies that the Nigerians were receiving that as a result of trying to pay back the debt, Nigeria's debt, the huge debt that they that has been accumulated. The masses of Africa or Nigerians are going to have to pay that cost, with high taxes and so forth. So this is one of the reasons that the people are protesting. It's the economic hardships. When you look at Nigeria, I think somewhere around close to 40% of their population, 39% of their population are living below the poverty line. Just to put things in perspective, there's an estimated 87 million people in Nigeria that are living in poverty. And that is the second most, after India, the second largest population in the world of people living in poverty in the country, right? So this is the contradiction of colonialism, capitalism, as we keep talking about, and neo-colonialism, when you have someone in place who is going to continue with policies or create new policies that make it more difficult for the people, the 87 million, and maybe others. When I look at these numbers, I'm always thinking like the number's higher anyway, because how are y'all measuring poverty, right? And so you're making life harder for those people, right? Because the cost always falls on the masses of people, and that's everywhere around the world, and African people in America, we know about that, right? Anytime there's a tax, we always get hit. The ruling class, never has to pay the same portion, amount as the masses, and the excuse used is they're giving more money, but percentage wise, it just doesn't make sense.
Shit away.
How are you paying? How the ruling class paying 12%, on taxes, and the masses, the working class, is paying 39-40%. That don't make sense.
And you have all these tax breaks and loopholes that you can do.
Yeah,
man,
it's ridiculous. But again,
but that's it.
I just want
to talk about it more.
Well, you had another article that you sent me that was the one that I actually read. So I actually didn't read this one. I read the other one that you sent. So we can definitely touch base on this tomorrow. I wanted to respect, again, the work that you do for Rise Up, and make sure that people are aware of what's going on the motherland. But it's funny that you brung up even like the debt that, quote unquote, if we don't, like, if anything, they're in debt to Africa for all the exploitation that they have enacted onto our people. And if you look at that through the lens of Walter Rodney, it's a lot of fucking extraction and exploitation. And it's gone as farther to just not minerals and resources. The resources now can be classified as talent. So that means actual athletes. That means people who have intellect. That means all of that. They are all products. Exactly, human resources. And so Chairman O'Malley talked about at the Oxford at an Oxford forum, speaking about the African Union, talked about that it'll take almost 228 years for Africa just to reach the heights that all of these European powers have met. That in of it itself is diabolical. To know that like if we followed the same trajectory of exploitation, neo-colonialism and neo-imperialism, that it would take 200 years for us to just reach where they're at now. So
but
again, we don't want, and we don't.
You could never.
And
Yeah,
we don't,
you could never. You would have to oppress people in the same way. And you would have to go out there and get the same, do the same. There's only one word. The Europeans have already done the colonizing.
Exactly.
Set up the systems that they need to. You would have to literally replace them.
Yeah,
you have no doing the same thing with them. That don't, and it goes back to
because that means they're going to be, at another. If we reach where they are now, then they might have colonized some other planets by that time.
Right, exactly. There's no way. There is no catching up, and that's the thing I think people get confused about. I think especially sometimes when we think about people thinking about and this is purposeful because that's what the message that America sends out. That's the message Europe sends out. Oh, follow us, do this. There is no following. Yep. You cannot replicate this and do what because they've done it. That is why they would have to get out of that position. And then also they've already destroyed the universe, the earth enough.
Thank you.
You really
the universe, they about to get there. They working on
like I always say, like I always say, the people who believe in black capitalism and that myth that that's how we get ourselves out of this, how Africans get ourselves out. You are falling for again aesthetics that fall in line with neo-colonialism, which going on in Africa right now, what's going on even here with all of these individuals, as Glenn Ford talked about, the Black misleadership class. These individuals, his words are prevalent today because look, we have an individual who now is asking for the black vote, but has done the worst harm to the black community. And that's on both sides of this dead ass bird. So we're gonna wrap up there. We are gonna take a quick
we're going to a break.
We're gonna go to a break, but before we go out, if you wanna touch on something,
last thing going just with Steadfast, because they talked about there were 13 Nigerian protesters that were killed, and this is what the state does to deter us from resisting colonialism. And this is what happened to our movement in the 60s and 70s, where we will see our comrades being murdered, and we're at the time where a lot of people don't want to get organized or resist the system because they're scared to go to jail or be killed. This is the thing, we don't want to end up like that. We don't have to struggle, we don't have to die no more, we don't have to be martyrs no more. And I get that, but
again, as Walter Rodney classified, and it's a quote that I use very often because it speaks wonders. They can give you a house, they can give you a nice paying job, a nice bank account, a nice car, but that all comes at the expense of your black soul, and you in part have conformed to a system that during your hardships won't lift you up, it'll beat you down, and will use you and abuse you. Again, human resources, as Walter Rodney talked about, the extraction of resources that help develop these underdeveloped countries like Europe and whatnot, because they didn't have the minerals and resources, so they took from other developing countries that were in the process of that gave mathematics to the world, that gave literature to the world, that gave the first sign, all of this. So again, we're going to be breaking, all of that down, but the importance of understanding why we need a united Africa, a united African front, is so that we end neo-colonialism, we end what's going on in Nigeria. Shout out to the Sahel Alliance that just was enacted with that's something that I think we could probably get into tomorrow. But before we go to this break, I just want to give a little context. The conversation we're going to have is going to be rooted in environmentalism. It's going to be rooted in understanding how colonialism affects the environment as well. And so I'm going to have a very, very dope person come on, a comrade of mine by the name of Francis Mendoza. And so for now, take some words and oral history of California Indians from the chairman of the Amah-Mutsun tribe, Valentin Lopez, as he breaks down California Indian history.
The true history of California has never been told. The history of California is really disgraceful and shameful. California Indian history does not begin with the Spanish expedition coming into California in 1769. California Indian history actually begins with Pope Alexander issuing the papal bull in 1453 that said all indigenous people around the world are heathens, pagans, and savages. That indigenous people have no soul. That indigenous people are the enemies of Christ. That indigenous people were to be put into perpetual slavery. That indigenous people, their property and their possessions were to be taken from them. That's what started it all. There was a number of other papal bulls. I believe there was 4 in total over the next 50 years issued by other subsequent popes as well. The final papal bull gave Portugal the southern hemisphere to go out, conquer, to claim those lands for Portugal and to turn and make them Christian nations. The northern hemisphere was given to Spain so they could claim those lands for Spain and claim them as Christian nations for the Catholic Church. That's where the mission period started from. Then they went into Africa, India, Indonesia, the Pacific Islands, and then the Americas. And that's what brought the missions to California. In 1769, the Portola expedition came up. And that's what opened the way through. When the missions come in, a lot of people think that Junipero Serra was here to evangelize, to proselytize, to turn those Indians. Nothing could be further from the truth. Junipero Serra came to California to fulfill the dictates of those papal bulls, to take the land, to take the possessions. Junipero Serra was the founder of the California mission system, first of all. He, prior to coming to California, he was in Mexico, and he was working down there with one part of the community he worked with was a Jewish community that came from Europe. And they brought him to the New World, trying to take the Jewish out of them, and they promised to become Catholic. They were looking for a place to survive. And so whenever he was working with the Jewish in Mexico, he never believed that they truly converted. And so whenever he came to California, he was convinced that he had to break the culture before they would truly convert. And that's why he was so brutal. So when they came here, they looked to destroy our humanity, our spirituality, our culture, and our environment. Well, the way they would capture the Indians, a lot of people talked about, how the Indians came to the missions voluntarily. We have in our oral history, and it's documented as well, of the soldiers would go out and do an early morning raid. They would identify the village site that they were where they would have the raid, and then the soldiers on horseback would attack that village site, and they would target the women. They would capture the women, and then they would tie them together, thumb to thumb, to form a human chain. Once all the women were captured, they'd start marching them back to the mission. And when they marched back to the mission, they knew the children would naturally follow their mothers. And they knew that it was just a matter of a short period of time before the husbands and the men would come in to be with their families. That's how many of the many Indians were taken to the missions at the beginning of the mission period. Once they got to the mission, they couldn't speak their language. They couldn't wear their clothing. They couldn't sing their songs. The men from the women from the children were separated. That was to break the culture. The children, they did not want the parents passing that knowledge on to the children until the parents were converted or the children were converted to Catholicism. There was whippings, brutality. I said they separated the women. The soldiers did not bring a bunch of their wives or families, and there wasn't a lot of other women here for them. And so they would go into that woman's barracks and just rape the women continuously. There was slavery. There was absolute slavery. The Indians were not allowed to leave. They were totally controlled by the church. That went on to the Mexican period. There was no labor force here. They were giving these huge land grants to the Mexicans who were well connected. And what they would do is they wanted to get these huge ranches with cattle, pigs, horses, sheep. And they were totally ruining the environment of the indigenous peoples, destroying the environment. There was no labor force here. So once again, the Indians were enslaved. There's a story in San Juan Bautista in 1839. One of the Indians tried to run away from one of those ranchos. They ran out and lassoed him by the neck and dragged him all the way back and left his body there to terrorize and put fear into the Indians. That if you run away, this is what's going to happen to you. That was slavery. Then came the American period, the California period. The year that California became a state in 1848, that was a year they discovered gold. Now you have thousands of people from across the United States and around the world coming to California to go stake their claim to their riches. And they're going up into the mountains, and the Indians were trying to protect their lands and prevent people from going to their lands. So all of a sudden we have an Indian problem. The federal government had a solution, and the California government had a solution. The federal government they negotiated treaties, 18 treaties for all California tribes, covering 8.5 million acres north to south. Our tribe signed that treaty. The commissioners that were sent to negotiate those treaties signed. They were sent to Washington to be ratified. The state of California did not want those treaties to be signed. They passed a resolution to oppose the ratification of those treaties. And then they sent a delegation of California state senators to lobby against the treaties being ratified. After a period of time, the governor ordered that those treaties be sealed for 50 years, and they were never signed. Our treaties that we signed were sabotaged by the state of California. The state of California had their own plan. They wanted extermination. The governor in the very first State of the Union said that there will be a war against the California Indians. That is to be expected. That was their plan. A couple years later, they passed one of the very first treasury bonds that was paid by the state of California was to pay for the extermination of California Indians. Today, they issue bonds for railroad improvement, for waterways, for housing, for schools, for parks. But can you imagine issuing a bond to pay for the extermination of California Indians? They were paid bounty money. They were paid 25 cents to $5 bounty. It was pretty average for every dead Indian. They paid militias rather, to go up in the mountains to find the Indians and to kill them. They were paying people to hunt down human beings to kill them. After that period of time, they passed laws where they could kidnap the children. Because once again, they're trying to take the Indian out of the children. It wasn't uncommon for them to kill the parents and take the children in and sell them. The prices that I hear are boys typically would sell for $150, and they were used for very hard labor. Girls, there wasn't a lot of females. There wasn't a lot of women here in California for the men that were here. And so girls, they sold for a higher price. They were sold for $300. And they were sold for very bad purposes to be used by those people in most cases. There was indentured servitude. Indentured servitude is slavery. There's records of Indians being enslaved in California into the 1930s. That's less than 100 years ago. People were born. People are alive today when there was legalized Indian slavery here in California. This history's never told.
Those are some heavy bars.
Yeah.
My brother was rapping right there.
For those who don't know, he's talking about my history. He's talking about what happened to my people, my mother's side of the two cultures that I represent. And so every time I watch that video, I get flashbacks. I get pictures of my great grandfather Bachi, knowing, knowing what happened, knowing the boarding schools, knowing the history, the exploitation, what settler colonialism, what genocide looks like, the catastrophe, as Benjamin Madley talks about. It's a book of the catastrophe of the United States, basically extermination of California Indians. And so it's a good book for those to drop. And as our guest that's going to come up knows very well the history and the exploitation of California. And so today's conversation is going to be with Francis Mendoza, who is a naturalist, has over 20 plus years of experience working with California Indians, Plains Indians, indigenous people of all areas of the world. Is a comrade of mine, someone who in the midst of being around indigenous people has never put himself in a position to how like most would do is try and speak over or try and speak against. Has always worked in reciprocity with the land, with the people. And so without further ado, I want to invite Francis Mendoza to the stage so that we can break down this conversation. How you doing, Francis?
Doing well, brother. Hey, y'all. Thanks for having me on. Thank you for the kind words, and appreciate being on the podcast.
Yeah. This is a conversation that me and you have had in the past. We have had technical difficulties, so hopefully that doesn't happen today. But nonetheless, it's fingers crossed, everybody. We just watched Valentin Lopez, chairman of the Amamutsin tribe, which I believe you have worked with in the past. Just those words alone have deep rooted pain, sorrow. As me being a California Indian, it's very hard sometimes to even listen to that, but I understand how important it is for me to be prevalent and understand that and keep that reinforced in the back of my mind. As a person who's worked with indigenous peoples, particularly with Val's tribe, how important are those words today, and how important is it for us as individuals that have lived in California or know about California or currently live in California? It is for us to know California history, because in books it's a couple pages about acorns and we yada yada yada, we're put on plaques, my people, that we're no longer here. And so as a person who's as a naturalist, an individual who's worked in reciprocity with the land, the true indigenous people, how important is it for people to learn this history? And thank you for coming on the show as well. So
yeah, no worries. Extremely important to really acknowledge the land that you're on, whether you come from that land or you come from another land. Like myself, I'm coming from the Philippines way back in 1981 when I was 5 years old, learning the language, thinking that American English was the ideal, but knowing that there's some rootedness within me that really speaks to the land. And like you said, the reciprocity that's needed to be able to be in good spirit with the land. I'm also in touch with the water as well. So I'm Tagalog, which is the language that I speak, but also it's defined as Taga-Ilog, which means from the river. So I work with an organization called Save California Salmon that's indigenous led and ensures water rights, tribal protection, as well as return of land back in many places here in Northern California. I live in Fremont, and Fremont, not many people know, is named after John C. Fremont, who went to California, like Chairman Val had mentioned, was paid many at that time $5 a head for California Indians' heads and their scalps, $2 for children and women. And there were so many massacres that occurred. Fremont did it as a general for the army and killed hundreds of Cosumnes River folks, Maidu folks, Nisenan folks, and did so with the sanction of the government. So those are the kinds of things that were happening, and many of that continues to this day in the form of other ways of water rights that prevents Native folks from doing ceremony, cultural genocide, also just the erasure that people have. Like, for example, Fremont has Mission Peak, a peak here that is very iconic. People go hiking up there, but it's also a sacred site to the Chochenyo Ohlone, and it's called Wisimu, but none of that is mentioned in any of the texts. So I think that it's really important for not only people who come from this area, from this land, Native folks, but also folks coming from other lands, to ensure that they're not only acknowledging the land in a way that's performative, that you always see in the opening of an event, a conference. Actually, Chairman Val was at the PGM1 summit that was held maybe about 6-7 years ago in Berkeley. PGM1 stands for People of the Global Majority in the Outdoors, Nature, and Environment. So it's Black, Indigenous, brown folks from all over the world are the majority. They're not the minority as people deem it here in the US. So using that power of that leverage of the shared solidarity that we have, the love of the land and the water, we want to ensure that those voices are being centered and heard. So we had our last one over in Muskogee Creek land in Atlanta, where Black folks, Native folks, Asians, folks from all around the world came together to highlight the work that we are doing, park rangers, naturalists like myself, to protect, conserve, and also highlight the people that are still here with us today. Oftentimes they're mired in ceremony or what we call buckskin and feathers, like a dog and pony show, and put onto stage by a lot of the organizations that we work with. But many folks don't know that they're still with us here today, fighting for 80 to 85% of the land, the indigenous land that they steward, but many of them are not a part of that land because they haven't, either they're not federally recognized, like the Muwekma Ohlone tribe. They actually just had a big action walking across the Golden Gate Bridge, and they're starting that off, going all the way to DC to talk to President Joe Biden about the fact that their non-federally recognized tribe can't benefit from a lot of the things that Native folks who have federally recognized status are able to. So those are the kinds of things that people fight for to this day.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. Natasha, did you
yeah, I was just gonna say, because I think it's important for people who are watching and maybe who are, because I feel like what you're talking about is very important. I feel like it's not always in the forefront when people are talking about organizing in terms of the environment. So if you could just explain a little bit more about what it means to be a naturalist.
Absolutely. So a naturalist is something I sort of fell into as a East Bay park ranger here in the East Bay of the Bay Area. And, I was like, what's a naturalist? And also y'all gotta be careful about confusing it with naturist, because that's a whole different thing where folks like to, go out in the buff, do their thing. It's cool. You do you. But naturalist is basically somebody who just takes care of nature. And what a lot of folks don't understand is that nature takes care of you back, right? That reciprocity that we speak to. And that speaks to a lot of the sort of white European centered naturalists like John Muir, who many folks don't know had racist notions and ideals and called Native folks, including the folks here in California, the Miwok folks, dirty, and advocated for them to be taken off their land, their own land, in what we now know as Yosemite National Park. So it's a trip to me that sort of European white-led narrative is the dominant narrative, but Native folks have been doing this from the jump. They've been naturalists and they've been scientists. Traditional ecological knowledge is something that I like to shout out and also attribute to my people as well, the Filipinos, as well as the Native folks here on Turtle Island. And that's stuff that, includes cultural burning practices. We wouldn't have all of these conflagrations and fires if we didn't heal the land with low intensity burns that clear all that fuel that oftentimes becomes a big fire, right? So that suppression there of fire is something that's actually very bad for the land. So those are kind of things that we really need to shout out. As a naturalist, I do that as a park ranger, but I also do that, like Isaac had mentioned, as a land and water justice manager for Save California Salmon, where I, on the background, make sure that the Native folks from this area are the ones that are highlighted, their families, their people that are a part of the tribal organizations, intertribal organizations as well, like Indian Collective and Illuminative. Those are the things that we really need to shout out and ensure that, first of all, our homie Leonard Peltier is taken out of jail because he's basically been given a death sentence by being denied parole for the last time. So that's something that we really need to ensure is something that, the justice system is being fair to our people. We all know that the FBI, the CIA, they're doing things in the background that is so duplicitous and really just something that has been shown through time that we cannot keep in our communities. We cannot have as a mantra of like, all right, these people are taking care of us, but we got to take care of ourselves. So free Leonard Peltier and also ensure that all of our tribal leadership is on the forefront, like Chairman Val Lopez of the Amamutsun Tribal Band, in these conversations.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. It looks like Natasha might have stepped out. You brung something up, like when Val was talking, about like how the stories are never taught, people like the land asking for certain grants or certain amounts of money, so, and being one of the first things that California did was they asked for money for the extermination of California Indians. But to take that even further, it wasn't just that, it was like over time we've seen since the Spanish period, the mission system is that when they brung cattle over, when they brung pigs and all of these things, these are invasive species to the lands of California. Can you speak to, first I want to highlight for those that don't know, because one person that it needs to be highlighted is someone who was a drunk. His name is L.A. Dorrington. He was a settler. He was someone who was advised to basically go around and count the amount of natives that were in California so that then they could put us onto reservations. And what he did was he used the money to in part fuel his personal indulgence into whatever he was involved in, but he also lied and fabricated numbers to make sure that individuals never got certain reservations or even certain plottages of land. So I just had to highlight that. His name is L.A. Dorrington, and he worked in reciprocity with the individuals who were the federal government to make sure the California Indians never got that. But to talk to about, on an environmental tip of the genocide that has happened to our plants, to some of our animals, some of the species of animals that California had. For example, the grizzly bear roamed from Mexico all the way up into Washington. And the last known California grizzly bear was killed in 1924. And it was also that it made it a lot easier for them to go into the California mountains where gold was at. And also they did it for sport. So like, if you could speak to, how settler colonialism doesn't just enslave the individual, it eradicates the culture, it eradicates even the connection to land and being, as everything that my people did was in reciprocity with the land. That means even our tuli, from our regalia to, which is our regalia, for those that don't know, is what we used to wear, our indigenous garments. From everything that we used, to live, whether, in reciprocity. So if you can speak to the importance of people to understanding, settler colonialism goes as far as into environmentalism and, the destruction of California as a whole.
Yeah, for sure, Isaac. Thank you for that question. I think that one of the reasons why I work in this field is because of my shared history of Spanish colonization. Like Chairman Lopez was saying, you have Junipero Serra, who's proselytizing the Catholic Church. It's big in my country as well. The Catholic Church is huge, and my parents, wanted to instill that in me. And there is that, sense of fundamental values and morals that is instilled. But there's also a huge problematic history there, obviously, with the boarding schools, where a lot of Catholics murdered innocent children. And also buried them, and they disappeared. And there's many boarding school survivors that we look to today as a part of the resilience that I have shared with my culture, with the native folks here on Turtle Island in California specifically. And speaking of resiliency, that stems into the gold rush, and that's why I have a big hang up with mascots like the San Francisco 49ers. A lot of folks think that it's an innocuous mascot to have a prospector, right? I don't know. I think his name is Sourdough Sam or something. As a mascot. Yeah, that dude, right? He's all up in the 50-yard line, just doing his thing. But he represents those folks, the folks who came here for the gold rush. Many of them did not get rich. They turned to other things. They went into salt pond farming. They went into agriculture, and all of that replaced many of the native plants that your people would cultivate. A lot of folks don't think that, especially archaeologists who would deem them as hunter-gatherers, didn't see that there was a lot more going on in there, from harvesting acorn, from singing to the plants, from, like the cultural burning practices. All of this was used to heal the land and still used to this day. Hopefully, that reciprocity will continue in a lot of the agencies that are working with Native folks, like CAL FIRE and the Mid-Penn Regional Open Space District, all these places that are doing it in a good way. So in essence, the gold rush signaled those folks to find other ways to employ themselves. And one of those ways was to kill Indians. The $5 a head, $2, all those massacres that Benjamin Madley, in his book An American Genocide, carefully documented, shows that there was so much pain and trauma that continues to this day with intergenerational trauma. As has been noted, the trauma doesn't only last with the generation that experienced it, but it's passed on through the genetics to folks today. So it's something that I think that is so important, that brings us to the environmental impact. What's happening right now in Palestine is so egregious in the murder of hundreds of thousands of 187,000, which was documented by The Lancet just about 2 or 3 weeks ago, of mostly children and women and men who are innocent. That massacre and genocide that's happening is in the forefront, rightfully so, to the ecocide that's also happening. In essence, not only in Gaza, but also in Lebanon, where the Israeli occupational forces are purposely burning and destroying environmental areas so that they can do so, maybe to settle them, maybe to just have retaliation. But the bombs that are being sent by Israel and being funded by the U.S. are increasing the carbon footprint by 10 times over and more. So those are the kinds of things that are happening to this day with the reality of war or essentially genocide, because there's not much of a war going on in a two-way process. But that is mirrored here in California in the history of trying to exterminate California Indians. As Chairman Lopez noted, Peter Burns, the first California governor, wrote down that there was an extermination of California Indians that is inevitable. It was going to happen. So what's important is that places like San Jose renamed the Peter Burns school to the Ohlone School. So ensure that not only the history of Native people here are honored and revered, but also a reversal of all of these injustices that have been happening to Native people since time immemorial.
Yeah, no, thank you. And you bring up something like the mascots, which a lot of people aren't familiar with. Like there's a Ohlone University, they're named Renegades. Renegade is a definition of one of the last of the indigenous people that were hunted by settlers in California. And so, I see Natasha has a question for you, and then we're going to highlight Save California Salmon, which is one of the main reasons why I brought you on here, because there's some great work that you're doing. Go ahead, Natasha.
And maybe my question might be part of what the work that you're already doing with California Salmon. I'm really interested because I've been working on creating land curriculum, particularly in the Northeast region, in the New Jersey, New York bioregion with the Lenape. And so I've been doing a lot of work around land and learning from land, all the stuff that you're talking about. So I have a bunch of questions in my mind, but I'm only going to ask one of these. And so when you were talking about land stewardship and all the practices that indigenous people in California were using to live in reciprocity with the land, I was thinking in the ways in which the destruction of the land is very tied. The destruction of the people was very tied to the destruction of the land, and thinking about how I forgot where this data came from, but around the world, places that environments and bioregions and ecosystems that have been stabilized are through the protection of indigenous people doing that work. That's most of the areas that in the world that are still thriving, in terms of the natural areas that haven't been destroyed, is because indigenous people have been practicing and protecting for them. So I'm wondering, especially in the education side, how in California are they or are they not, or even through your organization, things are being done in schools, introducing students to maybe curriculum that tells this story, that also troubles the narrative of environmentalism that we have today, that talks about oh yeah, we're gonna go save this and we're gonna do this, but leaving out the colonialism and the destruction that came with colonization and still continues today. So how is it in California being implemented into the curriculum? Do they have some kind of curriculum that exists that teaches students about indigenous ways of knowing and incorporates their history and also their presence into the curriculum around the environment, but also what needs to be done currently?
Yeah, thank you for that question, Natasha. For sure, we have a curriculum with Save California Salmon that is, as I mentioned, TEK, or Traditional Ecological Knowledge. That's science-based indigenous way of knowing, or ways of knowing, but also incorporated with it all the other cultural aspects of taking care of the land, not just science, but also the religion, the ceremony, the family practices. Those are things that are ingrained in the practices of Native folks here and in many Native communities all across the world. Like you mentioned, and I think the figure is 5% or so of the indigenous peoples across the world. That's how much people identify as indigenous, only 5%, but they protect 80 to 85% of the land that we are on. Obviously, the water, right? An example of that is 7-8 years ago with the Dakota Access Pipeline, and how the indigenous folks and their accomplices were the ones protesting, putting themselves on the line, getting pepper sprayed and water hosed down as they're protecting not only the water rights for the Olala Sioux and Lakotans, but also everybody down the river from the Mississippi to the Missouri River. And I'm seeing here video of some of the stuff that we do. So that, that part of decolonizing is not just the curriculums. We also have a water justice curriculum, but all these folks here are Native folks and their youth and their families who are out on the rivers, enjoying the rivers. So we not only highlight the boarding schools, the missing and murdered indigenous peoples. Those are all things that are necessary and needed to highlight, but also the obvious joy as you see young folks and their families just floating down the river and enjoying the water that is, a part of their territory. So thank you for shouting that out. The curriculum we've had so many raft trips with families this summer. We actually had a landback symposium last year in Humboldt, Cal Poly Humboldt, and put out a red paper on it this year with the under the guidance of one of our board members, Dr. Kutcha Risling Baldi. And then here's another example that you have on the video is the taking down of the Klamath dams. So along with taking them down, mechanically, which has been historically keeping salmon from going back to their breeding grounds in their water areas, it's also kept areas from having, the plants, the native plants that have always enjoyed that area, the animals, all of the relatives that we have that are non-human are being taken care of. But there's a lot of opposition to it. Obviously, there are a lot of settlers. A lot of them are white settlers up in that area that are against it because they bought a house, a boat, a marina, or whatever in the reservoirs that were formed with these dams, and now they want to vehemently protect it. But they're showing out information that by taking down the dams, all of that sediment is going to mess up the environment and kill fish, when in fact it hasn't. Even in just the last year, when it started to be taken down in October of last year, there's so much environmental restoration that's happening. And not only restoration of the plant and animal relatives, but also the people who we've taken up there on field trips, the youth, their families, ever since this got started with the Warren Buffett, who had all these dams, 20 to 30 years ago, and people protested it. Now it's time for these dams, the J.C. Boyle Dam, the Copco Dam, Iron Gate dams to be taken down, and it's on the horizon. I think Iron Gate or J.C. Boyle has just been taken down over the last week, and all the folks, the native folks there are just loving it because now they have, when their kids were like newborns and they were at the courts and the EPA and the water board protesting these actions. Now their kids are 20 to 25 years old and out there looking at what their family has done to fight against these dams. So something that I'm very proud of to be a part of with Save California Salmon is this history of dam removal.
Yeah, no, thank you for that, Francis. I had a question, and I think you already might have answered it in regards to Save California Salmon. I when I look at the work that you guys are doing, which you do the work with, with my people, my relatives, it really just brings joy to my eyes. But even then, so I just want to like break down for the viewers, as an Ohlone man, as someone who loves both sides of my culture, being both, African and being indigenous to California. And I know there's people that are out there that are like FBA and ADOS that like to lie and steal indigenous culture, which again is an aesthetic of white hegemony because it wants you to believe that you're not African. So then you lose focus on what they're doing in Africa. This is the first time that I've seen the work that's being done for Ohlone people be highlighted and be showcased on this platform. And I'm happy to have you here to do it. I'm going to be working on potentially getting Karina Gold on so that we can get an actual Ohlone relative of mine on, someone who I've spoken to. I'm just really I'm excited. I told Natasha and Ikemba, who had to unfortunately dip, but gave I appreciate his time that he was here with us on the show, and I hope the viewers did too. As he puts in a lot of work for us. This was like a big day for me. And so I just want to say thank you, for the work that you do as it was, as it was shown. One last question I have for you, and it has relatively nothing to do with the work that you do. What is the best Filipino dish that you would recommend?
Oh man, that's a tough one. There's a lot out there. There's a lot out there for sure, but it depends on what time of year it is. It's like, if you're cold, it's wintry, then you have this nice sour soup called sinigang. It's one of my favorites. And then if you're, looking for something, for the barbecue, bring it over to a family barbecue, share food. The standard lumpia is always good. Fried egg rolls with shrimp and chicken in there. And, I have a long history with lumpia, man. My mom would always ask me to roll up all these hundreds of lumpia and fry it in the side of the yard and everything. And it's like, because you didn't want to smell up the house or nothing like that. And, so I have a little bit of trauma in that regard. But to this day, I look to lumpia as a great food. But thank you for that question, Isaac. We'll definitely hook it up at a barbecue someday.
Oh, most definitely. I'm gonna be in California pretty soon. I'm not gonna disclose the date on air, but I'll be on the back burner letting you know where I'll be at, and we'll be visiting you and whatnot. I want to say thank you to you coming on. We're pressed for time, to say the least. I want to thank you for coming on. We're gonna try and have you back on, and like I said, maybe Karina Gold can come on and discuss, from another Ohlone perspective, me being Ohlone, she being Ohlone as well. We can break this down, but this was beautiful. I want to again say thank you, and we will see you. We will see you next time.
All right, take care, y'all.
Peace.
Later. So yeah, that was Francis Mendoza, naturalist. How did you think that went, Natasha?
I thought it went well. Can you hear me? I want to make sure you can.
Yeah, I can hear you well.
Yeah, for some reason on my end it looked like it was frozen. I thought it was very informative. I've never heard I've never heard the term a naturalist. So that was interesting for me, as well as learning all that history about the Ohlone and what's going on in California. I think the work that I've been doing with the Lenape in this region and doing land curriculum recently, I've over the past 3 years, I've gotten really into doing a lot of stuff around land and land curriculum. And I think one of the other things too, like when we say words like indigenous, and a lot of times people just think like, oh, indigenous here to Turtle Island, but also when we're talking about indigenous people, even worldwide, we're talking about African people, right? Indigenous ways of knowing, indigenous ways of doing it, and how can the ways that indigenous people here are working to get land back, restore their languages, reclaim their culture, practice it, restore it, safeguard it. What are the things that we can learn from what's being done here by indigenous people here, and also what can be done by indigenous people, like let's say, for example, in Africa, in terms of getting back land, restoring your culture and practices and ways of knowing, because that's the key part too, is how connected your indigenous way of knowing, your indigenous way of your indigenous cosmological view of reality in the world inform your practices as it relates to your environment. And so I thought, I learned a lot, and it was very informative just for the work that I do around land curriculum, but also in the work that I do around African-centered education and what that means to have African people reconnect to the land and do that kind of work. Because like we know, colonization, that was the destruction of the land is connected directly to the destruction of the people. They weren't just destroying the people, but they were also destroying the land and every other more than human thing more than human entity on the land.
Yeah, no, most definitely. And, we see, well, at least I hope the viewers saw what my culture, at least one part of it, has had to endure. Me living in California, being a California native, a true California native, as we have FBA, ADOS that, love to spew, false rhetoric and narratives and whatnot. But we'll save that for a different day. I want to say thank you, Natasha, for being a part of this. This was something that was very important to me, and to be able to share space with Francis is always a fun times. But most importantly, to be able to highlight my indigenous roots, and you asked the questions and whatnot in regards to okay, well, what is a naturalist, and we expanded upon the conversation. I just really appreciate I appreciate you as a co-host. That's what I'm basically trying to say. I appreciate you as
You're
a co-host.
welcome. Yeah, you're welcome.
we are pressed for time, as we do have an outro. But I want to say for the viewers, we will see you Wednesday. This was Tuesday. So hope you enjoyed it. Hope you're enjoying your Tuesday. You're gonna enjoy your Tuesday. And we will see you Wednesday. So rise up.
Peace. Rise up, everyone.
Sometimes the riot is a quiet one, where the battle is to love yourself and function in society, where voices of reason are muted by anxiety, like gaining notoriety is selling your soul. So we tend to go no deeper than the shallow water level, trying to keep us overhead in the face of all the slurs and the stares. Mentally frozen, paralyzed by fear of failure and success. So we lock, stock, barrel, running while it's crumbling. All these towers and they're babbling, but the baby's in the bath and the stash under the bed. On my head, spinning from the circles and the puppets and the strings that they pull. Then we move. Reactionary warfare never produces winners on the field. Feeble and foolish. What tools and what weapons are we using? We need some new ones. Real revolution. It's real solutions. What we've taken on the ways of the ones who conquer with their guns and religion and division. Got my inner me looking like my enemy. Real revolution. Where my inner me really a mirror for the galaxy. New time, brand new paradigms, new contracts to sign. They thought that this would all be televised, though it's happening right before our very eyes. It's on the inside, with their guns cocked. When that rock drops, standing on the rooftop, praying that the mountaintop can live inside the valley. People tell me the reward is somewhere off in heaven, like heaven's only in the sky. A chariot's a swinging, like God is something separate from yourself, from your wealth, from your lover, from your neighbor. Oh, your savior is coming in your own name, coming with the face the same. Real revolution. It's real solutions. Where we've taken on the ways of the ones who conquer with their guns and religion and division. Got my inner me looking like my enemy. Real revolution. Where my enemy is really a mirror.